Now let's take a broader look at the flowering of science around the time of Newton. This is the emergence of science as a real profession, although again, hardly anyone earned their living this way. These were people who either had wealth or other jobs, and they did science as a hobby, as a recreation, in a sense for the purest of reasons. So let's talk about the flowering of science in the Golden Age. A lot of this was based in London around the time of Newton. We're in a period of time called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, of course, extends broadly far beyond science towards ideas, philosophy, politics, and society. Essentially, the Enlightenment spans a time from 1600 to 1800, and there are many major thinkers that contribute to this intellectual movement across Europe and into the United States. The scientific revolution also had a span of time. It starts perhaps with Francis Bacon, who laid down the rudiments of the scientific method. We've seen that it continues with Galileo, who's the first physical scientist. And so we have other people in subjects we're not talking about in this course, like William Harvey, who give us the first ideas of modern medicine. We have the emergence of mathematics, Leibniz, and the tools of science that will be needed much later on. So this is a revolution that occurs in stages over several generations and touches every area of mathematics and science. It's a turbulent time in England. We've talked about the bloodless revolution, where Charles dissolves Parliament and there's an English civil war, and only with the Restoration is the stability there for science to emerge as a modern enterprise. In the timeline of science, we can distinguish the early phase of science, which perhaps goes from the time of Copernicus up to Galileo, the classic period of science, which involves time from Newton perhaps to Darwin, and then the modern, which is 20th century. And we'll look at each of these phases in turn. But let's go back to the birth of science and see where it happened. This is London from the time around where Newton was born, a small city spanning only one bridge of the Thames, a few 100,000 people, a vibrant commercial and political capital of Europe. This is it in the middle of the 17th century, when Newton was entering his prime. People have used clever methods to try and recreate what London might have looked like. So let's spend a little time in the London of Newton at the beginning of his life. I grew up in part in London and went to college there, and there are still some places that are unchanged from 400 years ago, and even some pubs that were still around from Newton's time. Through this time, in the 16th and 17th century, most people held to what was called a medieval worldview, the chain of being, the static, hierarchical worldview of a social order that really was untouched by Copernican thought. It's omnipresent, for example, in Shakespeare's work and the other work of writers of the Elizabethan age. Intellectuals were members of secret societies. They really were almost like cults. We can think of the Order of the Rosy Cross, which no longer exists, and the Freemasons, which still do exist, who looked back to ancient knowledge for inspiration. The boundary between magic, superstition, and science was not as sharp then as it is today. Newton and the other great scientists studied the occult, as we've seen, especially alchemy. You can read Harry Potter for many more examples. He also spent, as we've seen, years on detailed analysis of the Bible, using numerology and focusing in particular on the timing of the apocalypse. Here is the motto of the Royal Society: take nobody's word for it. That could be the motto of modern science. It's not what someone's opinion is, it's you have to demonstrate it for yourself, prove it for yourself, do an experiment. And then we see a satire on this from Terry Pratchett. Now you see it, now you don't. The Unseen College. It was an invisible college of natural philosophers, physicians, and scientists. Remember, science was not a profession at this time. It was really not considered a profession. Philosophy was a profession, mathematics was a profession, but you had to be at a university to practice it. And so we can see the major figures that lead through this progression of the flowering of science. There's Sir Thomas Gresham, a rich London merchant who founded Gresham College and the Royal Society in the middle part of the 17th century. And he founded this college. It did not have classes or students. Its entire existence was to sponsor a small faculty to give public lectures. So Thomas Gresham cared about the public good. He cared about spreading the fruits of this emerging science with the general population. We see Francis Bacon, who puts down the rudiments and the skeleton of what we would understand as the scientific method, the empirical method. And that's the end of this topic.